The flight attendant was making final announcements when my phone vibrated with a message that would save my life. "Get off now. Your life depends on it." I looked up from the screen, my heart hammering, and that's when I saw him. Rogerio, my son's best friend, pretending to read a newspaper 3 rows behind me. Something inside me shattered completely. Can you imagine the terror of realizing that what you thought was love might actually be a death sentence? What would you do if you discovered that your own family was capable of something so unthinkable? I remained frozen in my seat, the phone trembling in my hands. But I already knew that whatever decision I made in the next few minutes would forever change everything I believed about the people I loved most. But before I continue, take a quick look to make sure you're still subscribed. I don't want you to miss any of these eye-opening stories. My name is Victoria Langford. I'm 60 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed I was the luckiest mother in the world. For 35 years, I worked as a high school English teacher, raising my son Marcus after his father died of a heart attack when the boy was only 15. I sacrificed vacations, new clothes, even my own dreams to give him the best education money could buy. When he graduated law school and married Rebecca, I thought all my struggles had finally paid off. And then, on my 60th birthday, they surprised me with something I never expected: a first-class ticket to Italy, the trip I'd dreamed of since I was a young teacher reading Dante to bored teenagers. The surprise came at my birthday dinner last Tuesday. Marcus and Rebecca had prepared everything perfectly: my favorite lasagna, candles on my grandmother's china, even a bottle of Chianti they'd been saving. When Marcus handed me the elegant envelope with the airline logo, I actually cried. "Mom, you've given us everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Now it's time for you to live a little." Rebecca nodded, her eyes bright with what I thought was genuine affection. "The flight leaves Friday morning. We've already packed your bags, everything you need for 2 weeks in Tuscany." I should have questioned why they seemed so eager for me to leave immediately. I should have wondered why they insisted on handling all the arrangements themselves. But I was so overwhelmed by their apparent generosity that I missed all the warning signs dancing right in front of my eyes. The morning of my departure, I arrived at the airport 2 hours early, buzzing with excitement. I kept thinking about the vineyards I'd visit, the art I'd finally see in person, the little trattorias where I'd practice the Italian phrases I'd been learning from YouTube videos. As I settled into my first-class seat, a luxury I'd never experienced, I felt like the universe was finally rewarding me for all those years of putting everyone else first. But then something felt wrong. The man in the gray suit 3 rows behind me kept glancing in my direction, and when our eyes met briefly, he quickly looked away. There was something familiar about his profile, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. The pieces clicked together like a lock turning. Rogerio Martinez, Marcus's law school roommate, his business partner, the man who'd helped us organize my husband's funeral arrangements. He'd been at my birthday dinner. He'd watched Marcus give me the tickets. And now he was on my flight to Italy on a Tuesday morning, carrying no luggage except a briefcase. And what I was about to discover would make that anonymous warning just the beginning of a nightmare that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my own family. The flight attendant was making final announcements when my phone vibrated with a message that would save my life. "Get off now. Your life depends on it." I looked up from the screen, my heart hammering, and that's when I saw him, Rogerio, my son's best friend, pretending to read a newspaper 3 rows behind me. Something inside me shattered completely. Can you imagine the terror of realizing that what you thought was love might actually be a death sentence? What would you do if you discovered that your own family was capable of something so unthinkable? I remained frozen in my seat, the phone trembling in my hands. But I already knew that whatever decision I made in the next few minutes would forever change everything I believed about the people I loved most. But before I continue, take a quick look to make sure you're still subscribed. I don't want you to miss any of these eye-opening stories. My name is Victoria Langford. I'm 60 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed I was the luckiest mother in the world. For 35 years, I worked as a high school English teacher, raising my son Marcus after his father died of a heart attack when the boy was only 15. I sacrificed vacations, new clothes, even my own dreams to give him the best education money could buy. When he graduated law school and married Rebecca, I thought all my struggles had finally paid off. And then, on my 60th birthday, they surprised me with something I never expected. A first-class ticket to Italy, the trip I'd dreamed of since I was a young teacher reading Dante to bored teenagers. The surprise came at my birthday dinner last Tuesday. Marcus and Rebecca had prepared everything perfectly. My favorite lasagna, candles on my grandmother's china, even a bottle of Chianti they'd been saving. The dining room smelled like basil and memories, warm and inviting in the way that only home can be. When Marcus handed me the elegant envelope with the airline logo, I actually cried. "Mom, you've given us everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Now it's time for you to live a little." Rebecca nodded, her eyes bright with what I thought was genuine affection. "The flight leaves Friday morning. We've already packed your bags, everything you need for 2 weeks in Tuscany." I remember how my hands shook as I opened the envelope, how the first-class ticket felt impossibly luxurious between my fingers. "I can't accept this," I whispered, but Marcus was already shaking his head. "You have to, Mom. We've already paid for everything, the hotels, the tours, even a cooking class in Florence." Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We want you to go, Victoria. You deserve this." I should have questioned why they seemed so eager for me to leave immediately. I should have wondered why they insisted on handling all the arrangements themselves, why they wouldn't let me see the itinerary, why they packed my bags without asking what I wanted to bring. But I was so overwhelmed by their apparent generosity that I missed all the warning signs dancing right in front of my eyes. What I didn't tell them that night, what I hadn't told anyone, was what I'd discovered 3 days earlier while cleaning out my husband Robert's old desk. Tucked behind a drawer that had always stuck was a bank statement I'd never seen before. An account with Chase Bank, opened just 2 months before Robert's death, containing over $400,000, money that should have been part of our joint estate, money that was still being accessed, even though Robert had been dead for 3 years. The most recent withdrawal was dated just last week, $30,000 transferred to an account belonging to Marcus Robert Langford, my son, using his father's middle name as if that somehow made it legal. I'd stared at that statement for hours, my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was legitimate business money. Maybe Robert had kept secrets to protect us somehow. I'd almost convinced myself there was an innocent explanation when I noticed the withdrawal pattern. Significant amounts pulled out every few months, always just under the limit that would trigger automatic reporting. The morning of my departure, I arrived at the airport 2 hours early, buzzing with excitement that now felt hollow and forced. I kept thinking about the vineyards I'd visit, the art I'd finally see in person, the little trattorias where I'd practice the Italian phrases I'd been learning from YouTube videos, as I settled into my first-class seat, a luxury I'd never experienced. I tried to push thoughts of bank statements and secret accounts out of my mind. Maybe this trip was exactly what I needed to clear my head. But then something felt wrong. The man in the gray suit 3 rows behind me kept glancing in my direction, and when our eyes met briefly, he quickly looked away. There was something familiar about his profile, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. He was reading the Financial Times, but his eyes never moved across the page. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold while he pretended to be absorbed in an article about market fluctuations. I turned around again, more carefully this time, and my blood turned to ice water. The pieces clicked together like a lock turning. Rogerio Martinez, Marcus's law school roommate, his business partner, the man who'd helped us organize my husband's funeral arrangements. He'd been at my birthday dinner, complimenting Rebecca's lasagna and toasting my upcoming adventure. He'd watched Marcus give me the tickets with that same strange, unreadable expression I was seeing now. And here he was on my flight to Italy on a Tuesday morning, carrying no luggage except a briefcase and wearing latex gloves that he thought no one would notice. The anonymous text message glowed on my phone screen like a beacon of terror. Someone knew. Someone was trying to save me. And the man 3 rows behind me, the man I'd trusted, the man I'd welcomed into my home dozens of times, was here to make sure I never came back. And what I was about to discover would make that anonymous warning just the beginning of a nightmare that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my own family. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. The anonymous message stared back at me like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Get off now. Your life depends on it. Below it, a second message had appeared. The man behind you is not your friend. Trust no one on this plane. I felt like I was suffocating. The elegant first-class cabin suddenly felt like a trap, all polished wood and leather upholstery designed to muffle screams. The other passengers chatted quietly, completely unaware that somewhere among them sat a woman who had just realized her own son might be trying to kill her. I needed to think. I needed evidence. I needed to understand what was happening before I made a decision that could ruin everything or save my life. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the bank statement I'd hidden in my purse 3 days ago. I'd brought it with me, telling myself I'd figure out what to do about it during my vacation. Now, staring at those numbers, the truth felt like a physical blow to my chest. The account number was foreign to me, but the pattern was unmistakable. Every withdrawal corresponded exactly to dates I remembered with crystal clarity. The first withdrawal, $50,000, happened the day after Robert's funeral, when Marcus had insisted on handling all the paperwork alone. "Mom, you shouldn't have to deal with this," he'd said, his voice gentle and protective. "Let me take care of everything." Another withdrawal for $25,000 happened exactly 1 week after I'd mentioned wanting to contest Robert's will, because something felt wrong about the beneficiary arrangements. Marcus had talked me out of it that very night. "Dad knew what he was doing, Mom. These lawyers have been handling his affairs for years. You have to trust the process." The largest withdrawal, $150,000, occurred just 2 months ago, the same week Rebecca had suddenly announced they were upgrading to a bigger house. "Marcus got a promotion," she'd explained, her smile bright and convincing. "We can finally afford the life we've dreamed of." I stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. My son, my baby, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, had been systematically stealing his father's hidden money. And somehow, Rogerio was involved. A memory surfaced like a knife twisting in my chest. Last month, I'd surprised Marcus and Rogerio in my kitchen, hunched over paperwork spread across my dining table. They'd looked up with guilty expressions, quickly shuffling the documents out of sight. "Just boring legal stuff, Mom," Marcus had said, his smile too bright. "Nothing that would interest you." But I'd caught a glimpse of the letterhead before they'd hidden it. Chase Bank. The same bank where Robert's secret account was housed. Another memory. Rebecca's sudden enthusiasm for my Italy trip. How she'd clapped her hands together and insisted they handle every detail. "You shouldn't worry about anything, Victoria. Just pack light. We'll buy you new clothes when you get there." At the time, I thought she was being generous. Now I realized she'd wanted to control exactly what I brought with me. My phone buzzed again. A third message from the same unknown number. "Check your luggage claim ticket. Look at the destination." With growing horror, I fumbled for the boarding pass and luggage receipt in my purse. Rome, Italy. 2 weeks. But as I looked closer at the fine print, my world collapsed around me. The return flight was listed as open return, date to be determined by travel agent. There was no scheduled return date, no specific flight home, no confirmation that I was ever meant to come back at all. I thought about the stories I'd heard on the news. Elderly people who disappeared during foreign vacations, their families claiming they'd wandered off or had accidents. Bodies that were never found, estates that passed quietly to surviving relatives, insurance policies that paid out after the mandatory waiting period. My breathing became shallow and rapid. The cabin seemed to be closing in around me, and I could feel Rogerio's eyes boring into the back of my head like lasers. He was watching my every move, waiting for something. But what? I forced myself to think like the English teacher I'd been for 35 years. When students tried to cheat, there was always a pattern. There were always accomplices. There were always more lies underneath the first lie. If Marcus and Rogerio were working together, if they'd planned this trip as a way to get rid of me, then someone else had to know. Someone else had to be involved. You don't steal hundreds of thousands of dollars and plan an elderly woman's disappearance without help. Rebecca. Beautiful, sweet Rebecca, with her perfect smile and her convenient explanations. Rebecca who'd insisted on packing my bags. Rebecca who'd known exactly what to say to convince me to go. I thought about all the times she'd asked innocent questions about my health, my medications, my life insurance policies. I'd thought she was being caring, interested in my well-being. But what if she'd been gathering information for something far more sinister? The flight attendant approached my row, her professional smile faltering slightly when she saw my pale face. "Are you feeling all right, ma'am? You look a bit unwell." This was my moment. I could tell her I was sick, demand to get off the plane, create a scene that would make it impossible for Rogerio to follow through with whatever plan he had. But what if I was wrong? What if my paranoia was making me see conspiracies where none existed? What if this anonymous texter was playing some cruel joke and I was about to destroy my relationship with my son over a misunderstanding? But then I caught Rogerio's reflection in the window, and I saw something that made my blood freeze. He was no longer pretending to read. He was watching me intently, and in his hand, partially concealed by his newspaper, was a small glass vial filled with clear liquid, the same type of vial I'd seen in Robert's medicine cabinet the week before he died. The same type of vial that had disappeared after his funeral, when Marcus had cleaned out all of Dad's medical supplies. I'd found my evidence, and I was trapped at 30,000 feet with a man who had come prepared to kill me. The vial disappeared back into Rogerio's jacket pocket so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. But the metallic taste of fear in my mouth was real, and the way my heart hammered against my ribs was undeniable. I had maybe 30 minutes before takeoff, and I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I excused myself to the bathroom, my legs unsteady as I walked past Rogerio's row. He didn't look up from his newspaper, but I could feel his attention following me like a predator tracking prey. In the tiny lavatory, I locked the door and immediately pulled out my phone, grateful for the airplane Wi-Fi I'd splurged on. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I searched for anything I could find about Rogerio Martinez. What I discovered made my stomach lurch with recognition and terror. 3 years ago, there had been a scandal at the law firm where Marcus and Rogerio worked as partners. An elderly client named Eleanor Whitman had died during a vacation to Portugal, just weeks after changing her will to leave everything to the firm's legal aid foundation, a foundation that, according to public records, had been dissolved 2 years earlier. The money had vanished. The case had been quietly settled out of court. I found Eleanor's obituary with trembling hands. Survived by one daughter who had been estranged from the family for several years, died of complications from a medication interaction while traveling abroad. Services handled by Martinez and Associates, Rogerio's firm. There was a photo of Eleanor at a charity gala, just months before her death. She looked exactly like I had always imagined myself in my golden years. Dignified, silver-haired, wearing pearls and a gentle smile. She looked like someone's beloved grandmother, not like a woman who would die alone in a foreign country under suspicious circumstances. I searched for more cases, my dread growing with each discovery. Margaret Chen, age 67, died in a hiking accident in Switzerland after winning a surprise vacation from a legal settlement. Patricia Williams, 71, suffered a fatal allergic reaction during a Mediterranean cruise, despite having no known allergies. All of them had been clients of Marcus and Rogerio's firm. All of them had died during luxury vacations they'd won or been gifted. All of them had substantial estates that somehow ended up benefiting the firm or disappearing entirely. The pattern was so clear it was almost insulting. They'd done this before, multiple times, and they'd gotten away with it because who suspects a mother's loving son of planning her death? Who questions a generous gift from family members who've always been devoted and caring? My phone buzzed with another message from my anonymous guardian angel. "You have 15 minutes before the door closes. Whatever you decide, do it now." He's getting nervous. I peered through the tiny bathroom window and saw Rogerio checking his watch. His leg was bouncing anxiously, and he kept glancing toward the lavatory door. The calm mask he'd worn earlier was starting to slip, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. I thought about Robert's death again, but this time with new eyes. The heart attack that had seemed so sudden, so unexpected. Robert had been in perfect health according to his last physical just 6 months before he died. But heart attacks could be induced, especially if someone had access to certain medications, certain knowledge about drug interactions. Marcus had been with Robert the night he died. I wanted to spend some time with Dad, he'd explained to the paramedics. We were watching TV together when it happened. I'd been so grateful that Robert hadn't died alone, so proud that my son had been there in his father's final moments. Now I wondered if Marcus had been there for an entirely different reason. The bathroom door rattled. Someone was trying to get in, but the handle turned without the polite knock passengers usually gave. My blood turned to ice as I heard Rogerio's voice, low and urgent. "Victoria? Are you feeling all right in there? You've been in there quite a while." I forced my voice to sound steady. "I'm fine, just a bit of motion sickness. I'll be out in a moment. Maybe I can help. I have some medication that might settle your stomach." The same medication that had settled Eleanor Whitman's stomach permanently. The same medication that might have given Robert his final heart attack. "No thank you," I called back, frantically typing another search into my phone. "I'm much better now." I found what I was looking for. A local news article from 6 months ago about a string of elder fraud cases in our area. The FBI had been investigating a network of lawyers and financial advisors who were systematically targeting wealthy widows and widowers. The investigation had gone cold when key witnesses had died or disappeared during vacations abroad. Marcus's name wasn't mentioned in the article, but the description of the scam matched perfectly. Befriend lonely elderly clients, gain their trust, discover their assets, then arrange for their convenient disappearance during luxury trips that were actually one-way journeys to unmarked graves. As I tried to connect the dots, I got curious. Where are you listening to me from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I like to imagine these stories echoing in so many different places, reaching other women who might need to hear this warning. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The secret bank account wasn't Robert's, it was Marcus's. He'd been funneling money from elderly clients into hidden accounts, probably with Rogerio's help setting up the legal paperwork. When Robert had gotten suspicious and started asking questions, they'd eliminated him. And now, 3 years later, they needed to eliminate the only person who might discover their scheme, me. But there was something they hadn't counted on. Someone else knew. Someone had been watching them, tracking their movements, and warning their potential victims. The anonymous messages weren't random. They were specific, detailed, urgent. Someone had been building a case against Marcus and Rogerio, and they'd recognized the pattern when my gift vacation was booked. My phone buzzed again. Flight attendant approaching Rogerio's seat. "He's asking about you. You need to make your choice now." Through the thin bathroom door, I could hear voices getting closer. Rogerio was talking to someone, his tone smooth and concerned. "I'm worried about Mrs. Langford. She's been in there for nearly 10 minutes, and she mentioned feeling sick. As a family friend, I feel responsible for checking on her." Family friend. The words made my skin crawl. This man who'd eaten dinner at my table, who'd helped carry Robert's casket, who'd hugged me at my birthday party just days ago. He was planning to drug me somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean and watch me die. But I had one advantage he didn't know about. I knew what he was planning, and I had help. I typed quickly to my anonymous protector. "Who are you? How do you know about this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who's been hunting them for 2 years. Someone whose mother was Eleanor Whitman. Get off that plane, Victoria. Let me help you end this." Eleanor Whitman's daughter. The estranged daughter who'd been cut out of her mother's will, who'd probably spent years wondering why her mother had died alone in Portugal. She'd been investigating her mother's death, uncovering the pattern, tracking Marcus and Rogerio's movements, and she'd been waiting for them to strike again. The flight attendant's voice was getting closer. "Sir, if you're concerned about a passenger's well-being, I really should be the one to check." I had maybe 30 seconds before they forced their way into the bathroom. 30 seconds to decide whether to trust a stranger's warning or continue on a journey that might end with my body floating in the Mediterranean Sea. But as I reached for the door handle, ready to face whatever came next, I heard something that made me freeze with terror. Rogerio was no longer talking to the flight attendant. He was on his phone, speaking in a low, urgent whisper. "She knows something. Change of plans. We need to handle this before takeoff." I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to hear every word of Rogerio's phone conversation. The blood in my veins felt like ice water as his whispered words reached me through the thin airplane wall. "Marcus, she's been in the bathroom for 15 minutes looking at her phone. She knows something. A pause. No, I can't wait until we're airborne. She's acting suspicious, and there's too much risk of her making a scene. Marcus, my son, was on the other end of that call, coordinating my death in real time. I don't care what the original plan was, Rogerio continued, his voice tight with frustration. She found something, and she's panicking. We need to switch to Plan B immediately. Plan B. They had multiple plans for killing me. The casual efficiency of it made me feel sick. Fine. Yes, I have it with me. But if we do this now, it's going to look suspicious. A woman her age having a medical emergency right before takeoff? Another pause. I know. Better than letting her get off the plane and start asking questions. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands and typed frantically to my anonymous helper. He's calling Marcus. They're changing plans, going to kill me before takeoff. The response came within seconds. I'm already at the airport. Security is on the way. Stay in that bathroom. Do not come out until you hear airport police announce themselves. Airport security. Someone was actually coming to help me. But would they arrive in time? Through the door, I could hear Rogerio's voice getting more agitated. She brought the bank statement, Marcus. I saw her looking at it. She knows about the Chase account. My heart sank. So they'd known all along that I'd found the evidence. This entire trip had been orchestrated not just to get me out of the country, but to eliminate me before I could expose their scheme. No, listen to me, Rogerio said, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible whisper. Your mother isn't some confused old lady. She's a retired teacher. She's smart and she's putting pieces together. The Whitman case was messy enough. We can't afford another investigation. Eleanor Whitman again. I thought about that sweet-faced woman in the obituary photo, probably feeling confused and betrayed in her final moments, just like I was now. I don't care about your sentimental feelings, Marcus. This was always going to be the end game. You knew that when we started this. A longer pause. Of course I understand she's your mother, but she's also the only witness who can connect us to your father's account. And now she's connected to us to Whitman. The casual cruelty in his voice made me understand something I'd been trying to deny. My son hadn't been reluctantly dragged into this conspiracy. He'd been a willing participant from the beginning. I heard footsteps approaching the bathroom door, heavy, deliberate steps that made my skin crawl with dread. Marcus, I have to go. She's been quiet too long. I'm ending this conversation. The sound of a phone snapping shut. Then, in a louder voice designed to sound concerned and caring, Victoria? I'm getting really worried about you. The flight attendant thinks you might be having a medical emergency. I pressed myself against the far wall of the tiny bathroom, as if that extra foot of distance could somehow protect me from what was coming. I'm a lawyer, Victoria. I know about liability issues when passengers become ill during flights. They're talking about delaying takeoff to get you medical attention. His voice was smooth, reasonable, exactly the tone he'd used at dinner parties when explaining legal concepts to impressed guests. I told them I'd check on you first, as a family friend. I have some medication that might help. Family friend. The phrase made my stomach turn. This man had sat at my Christmas table. He'd listened to me tell stories about Marcus's childhood. He'd comforted me during Robert's funeral, his hand warm and steady on my shoulder as I'd wept over my husband's casket. And he'd probably been planning my death even then. Victoria, I know you can hear me. I also know you've been looking at bank statements that don't belong to you. The concerned facade was slipping, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. You've stumbled into something much bigger than a family inheritance dispute. My phone buzzed with a text. Police are boarding the plane. Hold on. I nearly cried with relief. Help was coming. I just had to survive the next few minutes. But then, Rogerio said something that made my world collapse entirely. I understand you're confused, Victoria. Marcus explained to me how difficult it's been watching you struggle with memory issues lately. The way you've been forgetting conversations, misplacing important documents, getting confused about financial matters. Memory issues. I'd never had memory issues, but I realized with growing horror what he was doing, creating a narrative. If something happened to me, if I had a medical emergency on this plane, there would already be a story in place, A sad story about an aging widow whose mind was starting to fail, who'd become paranoid and confused, making wild accusations against her loving son. "Marcus has been so worried about you," Rogerio continued, his voice now loud enough for other passengers to hear. "He told me about the strange things you've been saying lately, the conspiracy theories you've been developing. It's more common than you'd think in women your age. The isolation, the stress of widowhood, it can really affect cognitive function. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. They were going to gaslight me posthumously. He loves you so much, Victoria. That's why he wanted to give you this trip. He hoped a change of scenery might help clear your head, help you think more rationally about these financial documents you've been obsessing over." I wanted to scream, to burst out of the bathroom and tell everyone exactly what kind of monster this man really was, but I forced myself to stay silent, to wait for the police. "The thing is," Rogerio said, and I could hear him moving closer to the door, "Marcus is worried that if you continue down this path of paranoid thinking, you might hurt yourself, or worse, you might hurt others with false accusations." The threat was clear. If I tried to expose them, they'd have me committed as mentally incompetent. They'd already laid the groundwork, probably with doctors, lawyers, maybe even Rebecca feeding them information about my concerning behavior. My phone lit up with another message. "Whatever happens, don't open that door. We're almost there." But even as I read those words, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze, the mechanical click of a key turning in the bathroom lock. Rogerio had somehow gotten a key from the flight crew. The door opened slowly, and I found myself face to face with a man I'd trusted for over a decade. But the Rogerio looking at me now wasn't the charming family friend who'd helped plan my husband's funeral. This was someone else entirely, someone whose eyes held the cold calculation of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Hello, Victoria," he said softly, stepping into the cramped space and closing the door behind him. In his hand was a small syringe, partially hidden by his sleeve. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your son's future." The space was so small that we were standing inches apart. I could smell his cologne, the same expensive scent he'd worn to every family gathering. I could see the tiny scar on his chin from a childhood accident he'd told me about over Christmas dinner 3 years ago. "Marcus loves you very much," he said, his voice gentle but his eyes dead. "But he loves his freedom more, and unfortunately, you've become a threat to that freedom." I opened my mouth to scream, but he moved faster than I'd expected for a man his size. His hand clamped over my mouth while the other brought the syringe toward my neck. "This won't hurt," he whispered. "It'll just feel like falling asleep, like slipping away quietly, the way elderly passengers sometimes do during long flights. Very peaceful, very natural." But just as the needle touched my skin, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Heavy footsteps running down the airplane aisle, followed by an authoritative voice shouting, "Airport police! Nobody move!" Rogerio's hand froze. For a split second, we stared at each other in the cramped bathroom, predator and prey suspended in a moment of terrible understanding. Then he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. "This changes nothing, Victoria," he whispered, pocketing the syringe. "Marcus is still your son, and sons inherit everything when their mothers die of natural causes." The bathroom door burst open, revealing 2 airport security officers with their hands on their weapons. But as they pulled Rogerio away in handcuffs, his final words echoed in my mind like a curse. "Ask Marcus about the life insurance policy he took out on you last month. Ask him why the beneficiary isn't your grandson. It's his business partner's offshore account." And that's when I realized the most devastating truth of all. My son hadn't just been stealing from me. He'd been planning my death for months, calculating its value down to the last dollar. The man I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. He'd turned me into a commodity, and the price he'd put on my life was exactly $750,000. The airport security office felt like a sanctuary after the claustrophobic terror of that airplane bathroom. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still in danger. Even with Rogerio in handcuffs, even with police officers taking my statement, his final words kept echoing in my mind. "This changes nothing, Victoria." Detective Sarah Chen sat across from me, her notebook filled with details that sounded like fiction, even as I spoke them aloud. Conspiracy to commit murder. Elder fraud. A network of lawyers systematically targeting vulnerable seniors. It was the kind of story you'd read in a crime novel, not something that happened to retired English teachers from suburban neighborhoods. Mrs. Langford, Detective Chen said gently, I need you to understand something. What happened on that plane today, that was just the beginning. Based on what we've uncovered in the past few hours, you're still in significant danger. My anonymous savior had turned out to be Dr. Amanda Whitman, a forensic accountant whose mother, Eleanor, had been one of Marcus and Rogerio's earlier victims. She sat beside me now, her laptop open to a spreadsheet that made my head spin with its complexity. We've been tracking their operations for 2 years, Amanda explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. After my mother died, I knew something was wrong. The will changes, the mysterious vacation, the convenient medical emergency. It all felt orchestrated. But I couldn't prove anything until I started connecting their other cases. She turned her laptop toward me, showing a web of interconnected accounts, shell companies, and offshore trusts that stretched across 3 countries. Your son and his partner have been running this scheme for at least 5 years. They target wealthy widows and widowers, gain their trust, manipulate them into changing wills or accessing hidden assets, then arrange for their deaths during luxury vacations abroad. How many? I whispered, staring at the names on her screen. So many names. 14 confirmed victims. Probably more we haven't found yet. Amanda's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in her eyes. Combined, they've stolen over $4 million from elderly clients, and they've gotten away with it because nobody suspects a victim's own family lawyer of orchestrating their death. Detective Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Langford, we need to talk about your immediate safety. Your son doesn't know yet that we've arrested Rogerio. As far as Marcus knows, you should be 30,000 feet over the Atlantic right now, beginning what was supposed to be your final journey. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't go home. I couldn't return to my normal life. The moment Marcus learned I was still alive and talking to police, I'd become a target that couldn't be protected by locks or security systems. What about Rebecca? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Is she involved? Amanda and Detective Chen exchanged a look that told me everything. Rebecca Martinez, Amanda said slowly. Maiden name Martinez. She's Rogerio's younger sister. The room seemed to spin around me. Rebecca, who'd held my hand during Robert's funeral. Rebecca, who'd insisted on cooking my favorite meals when I was grieving. Rebecca, who'd married my son and become the daughter I'd never had. The marriage was part of the long-term plan, Detective Chen explained. They needed someone inside your family, someone who could monitor your activities, gain access to your personal information, and help manipulate family dynamics when necessary. I thought about all the times Rebecca had asked seemingly innocent questions about my health, my medications, my financial planning. I remembered how she'd volunteered to help me organize Robert's papers after the funeral, how she'd been so helpful in dealing with insurance companies and bank representatives. She'd been gathering intelligence the entire time. The life insurance policy Rogerio mentioned, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How long has Marcus been planning this? Amanda pulled up another document. The policy was purchased 8 months ago. $750,000 with premium payments automatically deducted from the Chase account, the same account that's been receiving stolen funds from their other victims. 8 months ago. That was right around the time Marcus had started being more attentive, calling me more frequently, inviting me to dinner more often. I'd thought he was finally maturing, finally appreciating his mother the way Robert had always hoped he would. Instead, he'd been calculating the precise value of my death. My phone, which had been silent since the police confiscated it for evidence, suddenly rang from Detective Chen's desk. She looked at the caller ID and her expression darkened. It's your son, she said. He's probably calling to check on your flight status. The sound of Marcus's ringtone, a classical piece I'd chosen because it reminded me of the piano lessons I'd scrimped and saved to give him as a child, now felt like a death knell. What do I do? I asked. We need you to answer, Detective Chen said. Act normal. Don't let him know anything has changed. We need time to build our case and coordinate with international authorities before he realizes his plan has failed. But even as I reached for the phone, Amanda grabbed my wrist. Victoria, You need to understand something. Once you take this call, once you start lying to your son, there's no going back. Your relationship with him, whatever's left of it, it's going to be over forever. I stared at the phone, Marcus's name flashing on the screen. The son I'd raised alone. The boy I'd read bedtime stories to, helped with homework, cheered for at school plays and graduation ceremonies. The man I'd trusted with my life, my love, my entire future. The man who'd calculated that I was worth more dead than alive. I picked up the phone. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, forcing warmth into my voice even as my heart shattered into pieces. "Mom, how's the flight? Are you enjoying first class?" Marcus's voice was bright, cheerful, exactly the way it always sounded when he called to check on me. There was no hint of deception, no sign that he'd just spent the morning coordinating my murder. "It's wonderful, honey. Thank you so much for this gift. You deserve it, Mom. You've sacrificed so much for our family. Now it's time for you to enjoy yourself. Our family. As if we were still a family. As if he hadn't turned family bonds into weapons designed to destroy me. Is Rogerio taking good care of you? I told him to make sure you had everything you needed." The casual way he mentioned Rogerio's name made my stomach turn. He was checking on his assassin's progress with the same tone he'd used to ask about the weather. "Oh yes," I managed to say. "He's been very attentive." "Great. Listen, Mom, I know this might sound paranoid, but promise me you won't talk to any strangers on this trip, okay? There are a lot of scam artists who target American tourists, especially older travelers. I'd hate for someone to take advantage of your trusting nature." Older travelers, my trusting nature. Even now, even while orchestrating my death, he was manipulating me with fake concern for my safety. "I promise, Marcus. I'll be very careful." "Good. And Mom, I love you so much. I hope you know that everything I do is because I want what's best for you." The line went dead, leaving me staring at a phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Everything he did was for my own good, including planning my murder. Detective Chen was watching me carefully. "How do you feel?" I thought about the question seriously. How did I feel, knowing that the person I loved most in the world had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible? "Empty," I said finally. Like someone reached inside me and scooped out everything that used to matter. But even as I said it, I felt something else stirring underneath the emptiness, something harder and more dangerous than grief: anger. Amanda seemed to recognize the change in my expression. "Victoria, I know this is overwhelming, but we need your help. Rogerio's arrest is going to set off alarm bells. Marcus and Rebecca are going to realize their plan has failed, and they're going to run. We have maybe 12 hours before they disappear forever. What do you need me to do?" "We need you to go home," Detective Chen said. "Act like nothing happened. Continue the charade that you're in Italy while we coordinate with international authorities to build an airtight case. But Victoria, and I cannot stress this enough, you'll be in constant danger until we can arrest them." I looked at these two women who'd risked everything to save a stranger's life. Amanda had spent 2 years of her life hunting down her mother's killers. Detective Chen was coordinating an international investigation that could make or break her career. They'd given me a second chance at life. Now it was time to make sure Marcus and Rebecca didn't get a chance to destroy anyone else's family. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want them to know, when you arrest them, exactly who brought them down." "What do you mean?" I smiled, and for the first time in days, it felt genuine. I want them to know that the confused old lady with memory problems outsmarted them all. The drive home from the airport felt surreal, like I was returning to a life that belonged to someone else. Every familiar landmark, the grocery store where I'd shopped for 40 years, the park where I'd pushed Marcus on swings as a toddler, now seemed like props in an elaborate stage play designed to fool me into feeling safe. Detective Chen had insisted on having an undercover officer stationed across the street from my house, but as I pulled into my driveway, I realized how vulnerable I truly was. If Marcus and Rebecca decided to check on me in person, if they suspected something had gone wrong with their plan, no amount of police protection could save me from people who had keys to my house and intimate knowledge of my daily routines. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my front door. The house smelled like the vanilla candles Rebecca had given me for my birthday, a scent that had once felt comforting, but now seemed cloying and false. Everything in my living room looked exactly the same, but I was seeing it all through new eyes. The family photos on the mantel, Marcus's law school diploma hanging proudly on the wall, the throw pillow Rebecca had embroidered with "Home is where love lives." It was all a lie. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had handed me the airplane tickets just 5 days ago, and opened Amanda's laptop. She'd given me access to all her research files, warning me that what I'd see would be devastating but necessary if I wanted to understand the full scope of their conspiracy. She was right. It was devastating. The first document I opened was a detailed timeline of Robert's final months, cross-referenced with Marcus's financial transactions and medical records. What I discovered made me understand that my husband's death wasn't just murder. It was a carefully orchestrated financial operation that had taken months to plan. 6 months before Robert died, Marcus had started asking seemingly innocent questions about Dad's health, his medications, his daily routines. At the time, I'd thought Marcus was finally showing mature concern for his aging father. Now I could see he'd been conducting reconnaissance, gathering information about Robert's medical vulnerabilities and daily habits. 4 months before Robert's death, Marcus had started visiting more frequently, always bringing small gifts, herbal supplements, for Dad's energy, new medications, recommended by a colleague's doctor, vitamin combinations that might help with his circulation. Robert had been so pleased by his son's attention that he'd started taking everything Marcus suggested. I found photos of the pill bottles in Robert's medicine cabinet taken by Amanda during her investigation. Cross-referencing them with poison control databases and drug interaction warnings, the picture became horrifyingly clear. Marcus hadn't given his father a single fatal dose of anything. Instead, he'd gradually introduced a combination of supplements and medications that, when taken together over several months, would create exactly the kind of cardiac event that had killed Robert. The brilliance of it made me sick. Any individual medication was harmless, even beneficial. The combination was lethal, but only after weeks of buildup in Robert's system. By the time Robert collapsed, there was no way to trace his death to anything specific Marcus had given him. It looked exactly like what the doctors had declared it to be, a tragic but natural heart attack in an aging man with no previous cardiac symptoms. But Marcus had made one mistake. He'd been so focused on the medical aspects of his plan that he'd overlooked the financial trail. Amanda had discovered that Marcus had been systematically draining Robert's hidden accounts for months before the murder, transferring money in small amounts to avoid detection. But the week before Robert died, something had changed. The transfers had suddenly accelerated, as if Marcus was racing against a deadline. I found the answer in Robert's appointment calendar, which I'd kept in a box of his personal effects. 3 days before his death, Robert had scheduled a meeting with a new financial advisor, someone outside of Marcus's influence who was supposed to help him reorganize his estate planning. Robert had grown suspicious. Maybe he'd noticed the missing money, or maybe Marcus had gotten careless with his questions about Dad's assets. Whatever had triggered Robert's concern, it had forced Marcus to accelerate his timeline. My husband hadn't died of natural causes. He'd died because he'd gotten too close to discovering his own son's betrayal. I found myself crying for the first time since Robert's funeral. Not tears of grief, but tears of rage. Robert had died confused and possibly afraid, not understanding why his body was failing him, not knowing that his own son was watching him deteriorate with cold calculation. But even that revelation wasn't the worst thing I discovered in Amanda's files. The worst thing was what she'd uncovered about the other victims. Margaret Chen hadn't died in a hiking accident. She'd been poisoned with a substance that mimicked altitude sickness, then abandoned on a mountain trail where her body wouldn't be found for days. By the time searchers located her, any evidence of foul play had been destroyed by exposure and wildlife. Patricia Williams hadn't suffered an allergic reaction. She'd been given an injection of something that caused anaphylactic shock, then left alone in her cruise ship cabin while Marcus and Rogerio established alibis in the ship's casino. By the time her body was discovered, they were back in port with hundreds of witnesses who could vouch for their whereabouts. Eleanor Whitman had been the most heartbreaking case of all. Amanda had included audio recordings from her mother's final phone calls, voicemails Eleanor had left for friends and family during her last few days in Portugal. In them, Eleanor sounded confused and frightened, talking about strange symptoms she was experiencing, unexpected changes to her travel itinerary, and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. "I don't understand why Marcus and Rogerio insisted I extend my trip," Eleanor said in one recording, her voice weak and uncertain. "I told them I wanted to come home, but they said the weather was too dangerous for flying. But Amanda, honey, it's been sunny here all week. I think something's wrong with my medications. I keep getting dizzy, and I can't think clearly. I'm scared." Eleanor had died alone in a Lisbon hotel room, confused and frightened, calling out for a daughter who'd been led to believe she was estranged from her mother. The last phone call in Amanda's collection was Eleanor trying to dial her daughter's number, but getting it wrong because her cognitive function had been compromised by whatever Marcus and Rogerio had given her. As I listened to that final voicemail, a recording of Eleanor's labored breathing and whispered pleas for help, I understood something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about money. Marcus and Rogerio had been enjoying this. I found evidence in their communications, emails, and text messages Amanda had obtained through legal channels. They talked about their victims like game pieces, rating the difficulty of different murder methods, joking about how easy it was to manipulate lonely old people who were desperate for attention from younger relatives. In one particularly sickening exchange, they'd discussed my case specifically. "Marcus, Mom's getting suspicious about Dad's accounts. We might need to move up the timeline." "Rogerio, how attached are you to the Italy plan? We could make it look like a medical emergency during the flight." "Marcus, whatever's most efficient. She's been asking too many questions about the inheritance paperwork." "Rogerio, your call. Just remember, once we eliminate this liability, you'll have access to everything. The house, the life insurance, Dad's accounts, plus her retirement savings. We're talking about over $1 million total." "Marcus, worth it. Besides, she's been depressed since Dad died. People will understand if she has some kind of breakdown during travel." They'd discussed my death like a business transaction. Marcus had calculated my worth down to the dollar and decided I was more valuable dead than alive, and they'd planned to use my grief over Robert's death, grief that Marcus himself had caused, as an explanation for my breakdown. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of my son's monstrous betrayal, and felt something snap inside me. Not just my heart, though that was certainly broken beyond repair. Something deeper and more fundamental had been severed. My capacity for denial, my ability to make excuses for people I loved, my willingness to assume the best about family members who'd proven themselves capable of unspeakable evil. But as I reached for my phone to call Detective Chen with what I'd discovered, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A car pulling into my driveway. Footsteps on my front porch, the familiar sound of a key turning in my lock. Marcus was home, and I was supposed to be 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, beginning the final journey of my life. I could hear voices, Marcus and Rebecca, talking in low, urgent tones as they entered my house. They were supposed to think I was gone. There was only one reason they'd be here now. They knew their plan had failed, and they'd come to finish what Rogerio couldn't. I had maybe 30 seconds before Marcus and Rebecca reached the kitchen where I sat surrounded by evidence of their crimes. Amanda's laptop was still open, displaying photos of pill bottles from Robert's medicine cabinet and transcripts of Eleanor Whitman's final terrified phone calls. If they saw any of it, they'd know immediately that their entire operation had been exposed. My hands moved with a clarity that surprised me, quickly closing the laptop and shoving it into the drawer where I kept my recipe cards. I grabbed a cookbook from the counter and opened it randomly, trying to look like I'd been planning dinner rather than uncovering a murder conspiracy. "Mom?" Marcus's voice carried from the front hallway, artificially bright with the same fake concern I now recognized from our phone call. "Are you here?" I forced myself to breathe normally, to arrange my face into an expression of pleasant surprise rather than terror. "In the kitchen, sweetheart." They appeared in the doorway together. My son and daughter-in-law, the two people I'd trusted most in the world. Marcus looked exactly as he always did, tall and handsome in his expensive suit, his smile warm and genuine. Rebecca wore the soft blue dress I'd complimented just last week, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. They looked like the perfect young couple, successful and loving and completely devoted to Marcus's aging mother. No one looking at them would ever suspect they were calculating killers who just had their latest murder plot interrupted. "What are you doing here?" I asked, hoping my voice sounded curious rather than terrified. "I thought you'd be at work." "We were," Marcus said, moving closer to give me his usual kiss on the cheek. "But I got worried when your flight got delayed. The airline called to say there was a mechanical issue and they had to reschedule everyone for tomorrow morning." A mechanical issue. So that was going to be their cover story for why I was still alive, at least temporarily. It bought them time to come up with a new plan while maintaining the fiction that they were concerned family members rather than would-be murderers. "Oh no," I said, allowing disappointment to color my voice, and I was so excited to finally see Rome. "I know, Mom, but these things happen." Rebecca moved to my other side, her hand warm and apparently caring on my shoulder. "We thought you might be upset about the delay, so we came to check on you." In that moment, alone, I knew there was no turning back, but I found myself thinking, if you were in my shoes, would you have the courage to face it, or would you stay silent to survive? Write in the comments, I really want to know. The weight of their deception pressed down on me like a physical force. These two people, standing in my kitchen with concerned expressions and gentle touches, had spent months planning my death. They'd calculated the exact dollar value of my life and decided it wasn't enough to let me keep living. "Actually," I said carefully, "I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking about some things, and I wanted to talk to both of you about them." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a flash of wariness so quick I almost missed it. "What kind of things, Mom?" I opened the cookbook wider, as if I'd been genuinely studying recipes. "Well, with this trip giving me time to think, I've been reconsidering some financial decisions. I know we've talked about estate planning before, but I think it might be time to make some changes." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus and Rebecca exchanged a look that lasted barely a second, but I caught it. They were communicating silently, the way couples do when they've practiced dangerous conversations. "What kind of changes?" Rebecca asked, her voice still sweet, but with an undertone I'd never noticed before. "I've been thinking about setting up a trust," I said, watching their faces carefully. "You know, something that would protect my assets and make sure everything is distributed according to my exact wishes. I want to make sure no one can contest anything or access funds without proper legal oversight." Marcus's smile became strained. "Mom, that seems unnecessarily complicated. We've already got everything set up perfectly with the will and the life insurance policies. Adding a trust would just create more paperwork and legal fees." Life insurance policies. Plural. I filed that information away, wondering how many policies they'd taken out on my life without my knowledge. "But I've been reading about elder fraud," I continued, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. "Apparently, it's more common than people think for family members to take advantage of elderly relatives. Can you imagine? Your own children stealing from you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles working under his skin. Rebecca's hand on my shoulder had tightened imperceptibly, her fingernails digging into my flesh through my blouse. "That's terrible," Rebecca said finally. "But surely you don't think— you trust us, don't you, Victoria?" The way she said my name sent chills down my spine. Not Mom or Mother Victoria, the way she usually addressed me, but just Victoria, formal, distant, like I was a stranger rather than family. "Of course I trust you," I lied. "You're my family. I'm just being cautious. After all, I won't be around forever, and I want to make sure everything is handled properly when that time comes." "You're going to be around for a long time, Mom," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. "Don't talk like that." "Well, you never know. People my age can have sudden health issues. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents during travel." I paused, watching his face. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who get hurt the most when something unexpected happens. Marcus's mask slipped completely for just a moment, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood turn to ice. Pure, calculating hatred. Not the momentary anger of someone who'd been caught in wrongdoing, but the cold fury of a predator whose prey had proven more dangerous than expected. "Mom," he said slowly, "you sound almost paranoid. Are you feeling all right? You seem different today." Here it was. the beginning of the narrative they'd use to explain away anything I might say or do. Victoria Langford, the confused elderly woman whose mind was starting to fail, who'd begun making wild accusations against her devoted family. "I'm feeling perfectly clear-headed," I said firmly. "In fact, I think I'm seeing things more clearly than I have in years." The cookbook slipped from my hands and fell open to a page I'd bookmarked months ago. Robert's favorite chocolate cake recipe, the one I'd made for his last birthday, just 3 weeks before he died. As I bent to pick it up, a photograph fell out from between the pages. It was a picture of Robert's pills, the ones Marcus had been so helpful in organizing after Dad's heart attack. I'd taken the photo to remember which medications he'd been taking, thinking it might be important for insurance purposes. Now, with Amanda's research fresh in my mind, I could see that photo with new eyes. The combination of supplements and medications that Marcus had carefully curated to create a slow-acting poison. The evidence of premeditated murder sitting in my cookbook for 3 years. Marcus saw the photo the same moment I did. Our eyes met across the kitchen table, and in that instant, all pretense evaporated. He knew that I knew, and I knew that he knew I knew. The game was over. "Mom," he said, his voice completely different now, flat, emotionless, dangerous. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about your health. Rebecca and I have been concerned about some changes in your behavior lately." Rebecca moved behind me, ostensibly to look at the fallen photograph, but I could feel her positioning herself to block my exit from the kitchen. They were working together with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. "We think you might benefit from some professional help," Marcus continued, pulling out his phone. "I know a doctor who specializes in cognitive issues in elderly patients. He could see you this afternoon, maybe prescribe something to help with these episodes you've been having." Episodes. They were going to have me committed, declared mentally incompetent, and then eliminated at their leisure in some psychiatric facility where my death would be attributed to natural causes or suicide. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the intelligence of the woman who'd raised Marcus from birth, who'd taught literature to thousands of students, who'd survived 35 years as a single mother in a world that didn't value women like me. They thought I was just a confused old lady. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who'd spent the last 6 hours uncovering their entire criminal operation. "Before you make any calls," I said calmly, "there's something I think you should know." I pulled out my phone and showed them a video I'd recorded while reviewing Amanda's files. In it, I clearly stated my full name, the date, and my complete mental competency, then provided a detailed summary of everything I'd discovered about their murder conspiracy. I've already sent copies to Detective Sarah Chen, to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and to Amanda Whitman, Eleanor Whitman's daughter, who's been investigating you for 2 years. I paused, watching the color drain from both their faces. "Oh, and I also sent it to Channel 7 News. They're very interested in stories about elder abuse, especially when it involves prominent local attorneys." The mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. Marcus lunged across the table toward my phone, but I was ready for him. I'd had 3 years to think about all the ways I should have protected myself from Robert's death, all the signs I should have seen, all the precautions I should have taken. I wasn't going to be a victim again. The pepper spray I'd bought after Robert's funeral, the one I'd kept in my purse for 3 years without ever needing to use, caught Marcus directly in the face. He stumbled backward, clutching his eyes and cursing in language I'd never heard him use before. Rebecca grabbed for me, but I was already moving toward the back door, toward the police officer I knew was waiting across the street, toward the new life I was claiming for myself. As I ran from my own kitchen, leaving behind the son I'd raised and the daughter-in-law I'd loved, I heard Marcus screaming behind me, not in pain from the pepper spray, but in rage at losing control of a situation he'd thought he could manipulate. "You can't prove anything," he shouted. "No one will believe a confused old woman over her own family." But he was wrong. I had proof. I had allies. And I had something he'd never counted on having to face. A mother's fury unleashed against the child who'd betrayed everything she'd ever taught him about love, loyalty, and the sacred bonds of family. The game was over, and for the first time in 3 years, I was finally going to win. The police sirens were already wailing by the time I reached my front yard, but Marcus and Rebecca were faster than I'd expected. They caught up with me just as Detective Chen's unmarked car screeched into my driveway, and what happened next unfolded like a nightmare choreographed in broad daylight. "She's having an episode," Marcus shouted to the approaching officers, his eyes still red and streaming from the pepper spray. "My mother is mentally ill. She attacked me with chemicals, and she's been making wild accusations about our family." Even now, even with his criminal operation crumbling around him, he was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to paint me as the confused victim rather than the survivor who'd outsmarted his murder plot. But Detective Chen had been expecting this. "Step away from your mother, Mr. Langford," she commanded, her hand resting on her weapon. "Both of you, put your hands where I can see them." "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine relief. "Victoria has been acting so strangely lately. We've been worried about her mental state, and today she attacked Marcus for no reason. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't spent hours reviewing evidence of their crimes, I might have believed them myself." Rebecca's tears looked real. Marcus's concern appeared genuine. They were playing their roles perfectly. The devoted children trying to help their aging, confused mother. "Mrs. Langford," Detective Chen said, turning to me. "Are you injured?" "No," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "But they are. They're injured by the truth." Marcus laughed, a bitter, ugly sound I'd never heard from him before. "Listen to her, officer. She's been like this for months. Making paranoid accusations, imagining conspiracies, attacking family members. We've been trying to get her help, but she refuses to see a doctor." "That's interesting," Detective Chen said, pulling out her phone. "Because I have a video here that Mrs. Langford recorded this afternoon. In it, she provides a detailed, coherent account of a murder conspiracy involving you, your wife, and your business partner, Rogerio Martinez." The color drained from Marcus's face. She's been coached. Someone has been filling her head with lies, taking advantage of her mental confusion to— "Mr. Langford," Detective Chen interrupted. "Rogerio Martinez was arrested this morning at the airport for attempted murder. He was found in possession of a syringe containing a lethal dose of succinylcholine, a paralytic agent that would have killed your mother during her flight to Italy." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Rebecca stood frozen, their carefully constructed story collapsing in real time. "Furthermore," Detective Chen continued, "we've obtained warrants to search your financial records, your communications, and your business accounts. We have evidence linking you to the deaths of at least 14 elderly clients over the past 5 years." Rebecca broke first. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They know everything." "Shut up," Marcus hissed, but it was too late. The mask had finally fallen away completely, revealing the cold-blooded killer who'd been hiding behind the facade of a loving son. "Mrs. Martinez," Detective Chen said, addressing Rebecca formally. "Or should I say, Ms. Martinez, we know about your relationship to Rogerio. We know about the false marriage certificate, the fabricated identity, the entire infiltration operation. False marriage certificate." My legs nearly gave out as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Marcus and Rebecca weren't really married. Their entire relationship had been a lie, a cover story designed to place a co-conspirator inside my family. "How long?" I whispered, staring at the woman I'd thought was my daughter-in-law. "How long have you been lying to me?" Rebecca looked at me with something that might have been pity. "From the beginning, Victoria. From the very first day Marcus brought me home to meet you. Everything was planned." The memory hit me like a physical blow. 3.5 years ago, Marcus had surprised me by bringing home a girlfriend I'd never heard him mention before. "Mom, I want you to meet Rebecca," he'd said, his arm around her waist, both of them glowing with what I'd thought was new love. "We've been dating for a while, and I think she might be the one." I'd been so happy, so grateful that my son had found someone who seemed to genuinely care about him, someone who laughed at his jokes and helped him become more thoughtful and attentive. I'd welcomed her into our family with open arms, grateful for the daughter I'd never had. It had all been an act, a calculated performance designed to position her for the long-term manipulation and eventual murder of Marcus's mother. "Why?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Marcus stepped forward, and for a moment I saw a flash of the boy I'd raised. Angry, frustrated, feeling entitled to things he hadn't earned. "Because you never knew when to let go," he said. "Because you kept all of Dad's money tied up in accounts I couldn't access. Because you kept asking questions about things that weren't your business. I was your mother," I said, my voice breaking. "Everything I had was going to be yours anyway. You just had to wait." "Wait for what? For you to live another 20 years? For you to spend everything on medical bills and nursing homes?" His voice was rising now, the careful control slipping away. "Do you have any idea how much money you were costing us just by staying alive?" The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. I'd raised this man. I'd sacrificed everything for his future, and he'd calculated my worth based on how much my continued existence was costing him. "And Dad?" I asked. "Did he find out what you were doing?" Marcus's expression darkened. Dad was getting suspicious about some financial irregularities in his accounts. He was asking too many questions, threatening to bring in outside auditors. He forced his hand, as if murdering his own father had been an unfortunate necessity rather than a choice. "He trusted you," I whispered. His last words were about how proud he was of the man you'd become. "Yeah, well," Marcus said with a shrug that broke my heart. "Dad always was too sentimental for his own good." Detective Chen stepped between us before I could respond. "Marcus Langford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder fraud, and the murders of Robert Langford, Eleanor Whitman, Margaret Chen, Patricia Williams, and 12 other victims whose names will be read at your arraignment." As the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over, Mom," he said. "You think you've won something here, but you've just destroyed your own family. Everything you thought you knew about love, about loyalty, about the people who were supposed to take care of you, it was all a lie. And now you get to live with that truth for whatever time you have left." They led him toward the patrol car, but he turned back one final time. "Oh, and Mom? There's something else you should know. Something that's going to make all of this so much worse." Detective Chen tried to keep him moving, but Marcus planted his feet, determined to deliver one final blow. "The life insurance policies weren't the only arrangements I made," he called out, his voice carrying across the neighborhood where curious neighbors had started to gather. "Ask Detective Chen about the other documents I filed. Ask her about the conservatorship papers, the mental competency evaluations, the medical power of attorney forms." My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "I had you declared mentally incompetent 6 months ago, Mom. Legally, you're already under my guardianship. Everything you own, every decision about your care, every choice about your future, it all belongs to me now." He smiled as they forced him into the patrol car. "Even from prison, I still control your life. Hope you enjoy your freedom while it lasts." The car door slammed shut, leaving me standing in my own driveway, wondering if I'd actually won anything at all, or if Marcus had just played a game so much more complex than I'd realized that even his arrest was somehow part of his plan. Detective Chen's expression was grim as she watched the patrol car carrying Marcus disappear down my street. The neighbors who'd gathered to watch the drama were slowly dispersing, but I could feel their curious stares and whispered conversations following me like shadows. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did he really have me declared incompetent?" Detective Chen pulled out her phone and made a quick call. After a brief conversation filled with legal jargon I couldn't follow, she hung up and turned to me with an expression that made my stomach drop. "There are documents," she said carefully. "Conservatorship papers filed with the county court 3 months ago. Medical evaluations claiming progressive cognitive decline. Financial assessments suggesting you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs." The world seemed to tilt around me. Even in handcuffs, even facing multiple murder charges, Marcus had found a way to maintain control over my life. He'd anticipated this moment, prepared for the possibility that his murder plot might fail, and created a legal backup plan that would destroy me, even if he couldn't kill me. "But here's the thing," Detective Chen continued, and something in her tone gave me hope. "The documents are fraudulent. The medical evaluations were conducted by a doctor who lost his license 2 years ago for falsifying records. The financial assessments were based on bank statements that don't match your actual accounts. Amanda Whitman emerged from an unmarked van that had been parked down the street. She was carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for a very long time. "Victoria," she said, "I need you to listen carefully. Marcus and Rogerio have been using fraudulent conservatorship proceedings as part of their murder scheme. They identify wealthy elderly targets, have them declared mentally incompetent using fake medical evidence, gain legal control over their assets, then arrange for their deaths once all the money has been transferred." She opened her folder and showed me a stack of legal documents. "But we've been building a case against their network for 2 years. We have evidence that at least 8 of their victims were placed under illegal conservatorships before they were killed." "What does that mean for me?" "It means we can get these documents thrown out," Detective Chen said. "But more importantly, it means we can use them as evidence to prove premeditation in Marcus's case. The conservatorship papers show that he was planning your death months in advance, setting up the legal framework to steal your assets before eliminating you." I sank down onto my front steps, overwhelmed by the scope of my son's betrayal. It wasn't just murder. It was a systematic destruction of everything I was, everything I owned, everything that made me a person with rights and autonomy. "There's something else," Amanda said, sitting beside me. "We found communication records between Marcus and a network of corrupt lawyers, doctors, and financial advisors operating across 3 states. This isn't just about you and your family. This is about a criminal organization that's been systematically targeting and killing elderly Americans for their assets." She showed me a map dotted with red pins. 43 suspicious deaths over the past 7 years. All elderly victims, all wealthy, all isolated from family members who might ask questions. Combined, we estimate they've stolen over $15 million. The magnitude of it was staggering. My son hadn't just planned to kill me. He'd been part of an operation that had been murdering grandparents, widows, and elderly survivors across the country. How did they get away with it for so long? "Because nobody suspects family members," Detective Chen said. "When an elderly person dies during a vacation or has a medical emergency or suffers from what appears to be natural age-related decline, families grieve and move on. They don't typically demand extensive investigations into their loved one's death. And the legal system is designed to protect the wishes of mentally competent adults," Amanda added. "When someone signs a will or changes their beneficiaries, we assume they're making informed decisions. The idea that their own children might be manipulating them, drugging them, or threatening them is so contrary to our basic assumptions about family relationships that it rarely occurs to investigators." My phone rang, startling all of us. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but Detective Chen nodded for me to answer it. "Mrs. Langford?" The voice was elderly, female, and trembling with emotion. "This is Evelyn Patterson. I saw the news about your son's arrest, and I think he killed my husband." Detective Chen immediately signaled for me to put the call on speaker. "What makes you think that, Mrs. Patterson?" "Harold died 6 months ago during a cruise we won in some legal settlement contest. Marcus Langford was our lawyer. He insisted we take the trip even though Harold wasn't feeling well. Said it would be good for Harold's spirits." Her voice broke. "Harold died of a heart attack in our cabin. But Mrs. Langford, Harold had the healthiest heart you ever saw. Never had so much as chest pain in 60 years of marriage." Over the next hour, my phone rang 17 more times. Widows and widowers from across the region, all with similar stories. All former clients of Marcus and Rogerio's firm. All who'd lost spouses under suspicious circumstances during trips or medical emergencies that followed changes to estate planning documents. By evening, the FBI had set up a task force in my living room. My kitchen table was covered with evidence boxes, crime scene photos, and victim files stretching back 7 years. My house had become the command center for what was shaping up to be one of the largest elder fraud and serial murder cases in federal history. "Mrs. Langford," said Agent Sarah Morrison, the FBI's lead investigator, "I want you to understand something. What you did today, recognizing the pattern, gathering evidence, recording that video, you didn't just save your own life. You've potentially saved dozens of other elderly Americans who were being targeted by this network." She showed me a list of names on a laptop screen. These are people Marcus and Rogerio had identified as potential future victims. Wealthy widows and widowers, isolated from family, with substantial assets, and no close relatives to ask questions when they died. Based on the timeline we've reconstructed, you would have been victim number 44. Victim number 44. The casual numbering of it made me feel sick. I hadn't been a beloved mother to Marcus. I'd been a target, a transaction, a line item in a business plan built on the systematic murder of vulnerable elderly people. What happens now? I asked. Now we dismantle their entire operation, Agent Morrison said. Marcus and Rebecca will face federal charges for conspiracy, wire fraud, murder for hire, and racketeering. The corrupt doctors and lawyers in their network will be arrested and prosecuted. The fraudulent conservatorship documents will be voided, and everyone affected will have their legal rights restored. And the other families? The ones who lost loved ones? They'll finally get answers, Amanda said, and hopefully some measure of justice. As the FBI agents packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Agent Morrison handed me a card. Mrs. Langford, I want you to consider something. Your experience, your insight into how these predators operate, it could be invaluable in helping us identify and protect other potential victims. Have you ever thought about consulting work? I looked at the card, then at my house full of evidence boxes, then at Amanda, who'd spent 2 years of her life hunting down her mother's killers. You mean help other families like ours? Exactly like yours. Families who've lost loved ones under suspicious circumstances. Elderly people who are being isolated and manipulated by relatives or caregivers. There's a whole network of financial predators out there targeting our most vulnerable citizens. For the first time in 3 years, since Robert's death, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Purpose. When do I start? 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix, watching as Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He'd aged dramatically during his incarceration. His hair had gone completely gray, his face had developed deep lines I'd never seen before, and his eyes held a hollow emptiness that made him look like a stranger. When the judge asked if he had any final words, Marcus looked directly at me for the first time since his arrest. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. "Not for what I did. I'd do it again if I had to. But I'm sorry that you lived long enough to find out who I really am." Even then, even facing the rest of his life behind bars, he couldn't bring himself to show genuine remorse. The apology wasn't for planning my murder or killing his father or destroying 14 other families. It was for getting caught. I felt nothing as they led him away. No sadness, no anger, no sense of closure or justice. Just emptiness where my love for my son used to live. Rebecca had pled guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for testifying against the larger network. She'd been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, though she'd be eligible for parole in 15 if she continued cooperating with investigators. Rogerio had died in custody 3 months earlier, officially a suicide, though Amanda and I both suspected he'd been silenced by other members of their criminal organization who were afraid of what he might reveal. The FBI task force had ultimately identified and arrested 37 people connected to the elder fraud network. Corrupt lawyers, doctors, financial advisors, and even some nursing home administrators who'd been identifying wealthy, isolated residents as potential targets. The stolen assets recovered totaled over $28 million, money that was slowly being returned to surviving family members or donated to victim advocacy organizations. But the numbers, impressive as they were, couldn't capture the real cost of what Marcus and his associates had done. 43 elderly Americans had died terrified and alone, betrayed by the very people they'd trusted most. Dozens of families had been destroyed, their final memories of beloved relatives forever tainted by the knowledge of how they'd really died. I'd become something I never expected to be, a federal consultant specializing in elder fraud prevention. The FBI had hired me to help develop profiles of potential victims and identify warning signs of financial abuse in families. I spent my days training social workers, bank employees, and law enforcement officers to recognize the subtle signs of elderly manipulation and abuse. The work was emotionally exhausting but deeply satisfying. Every case I helped solve, every potential victim I helped protect, felt like a small victory against the kind of evil that had destroyed my own family. Amanda had become my closest friend and partner in this new mission. She'd used her mother's life insurance settlement to establish a foundation dedicated to investigating suspicious deaths among elderly Americans. Together, we'd helped reopen 17 cold cases, resulting in 6 additional arrests and convictions. My house felt different now. The family photos were gone from the mantel, replaced with commendations from victim advocacy groups and thank you letters from families who'd found closure through our work. The dining room where Marcus had given me those fatal airplane tickets had been converted into a home office where Amanda and I reviewed case files and coordinated with law enforcement agencies across the country. I'd had the locks changed, of course. I'd also installed a comprehensive security system and taken self-defense classes specifically designed for older adults. I would never again be vulnerable to someone who underestimated my intelligence or my will to survive. But some nights, when the house was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, the losses hit me like physical blows. Not just Marcus. I'd grieved for the son I thought I'd raised and buried that grief along with my illusions about family loyalty. The loss that haunted me was Robert. I'd never gotten to say goodbye to my husband. I'd never gotten to tell him that I loved him, that I was proud of the life we'd built together, that his death wasn't his fault. Marcus had stolen that from both of us, turning Robert's final moments into a confused, frightening experience where he died believing his own body had betrayed him. That was the wound that would never fully heal. I'd started attending a support group for family members of murder victims. It helped sometimes to sit in a circle with other people who understood the particular kind of grief that comes from losing someone to intentional violence. But my situation was unique even in that group. Most people didn't have to grapple with the fact that their loved one's killer was their own child. My mailbox these days was filled with letters from other elderly Americans who'd seen my story on the news and wanted to share their own experiences with family members who'd tried to manipulate or defraud them. Some were asking for help. Others just wanted someone to believe their stories. I answered every single letter personally, but it was the unexpected visitors who kept me most grounded in hope. Last month, a woman named Clara Hoffman had driven 8 hours from New Mexico to thank me in person. Her grandson had been slowly draining her bank accounts and pressuring her to sign over power of attorney, using many of the same tactics Marcus had employed. "I saw you on the news," she'd said, sitting in my living room with tears in her eyes, and I realized I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. My own grandson really was trying to steal from me. She'd contacted authorities, provided evidence of the financial manipulation, and ultimately helped prosecutors build a case that sent her grandson to prison for elder fraud. But more importantly, she'd reclaimed her independence and her dignity. "You saved my life," she'd told me. Not just from him, but from thinking I was losing my mind. Stories like Clara's reminded me why this work mattered, why I'd chosen to transform my trauma into purpose rather than retreating into bitterness and isolation. The doorbell rang as I was finishing dinner, interrupting my thoughts. I checked the security camera and saw a young woman I didn't recognize, probably in her 30s, standing nervously on my front porch. I opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Langford? My name is Jennifer Chen. Margaret Chen was my grandmother." Margaret Chen, one of Marcus and Rogerio's victims, the woman who'd supposedly died in a hiking accident in Switzerland. I invited Jennifer in immediately. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "For 3 years, my family has been told that Grandma Margaret died because she was reckless, because she went hiking alone despite her age. We've blamed ourselves for not stopping her from taking that trip." She pulled out a letter from her purse. "But after your son's arrest, the FBI reopened Grandma's case. They found evidence that she was murdered. That letter is from the Swiss police. They're formally changing her death certificate from accidental to homicide." I watched tears stream down Jennifer's face as she continued. "We finally know the truth. Grandma wasn't reckless or foolish. She was murdered by someone she trusted. And now, because of you, her killer is going to spend the rest of his life in prison." After Jennifer left, I sat alone in my living room, thinking about legacy and justice and the strange ways that good can emerge from unthinkable evil. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, leave your like, and share it with someone special who needs to hear what I lived through. This is a space of love and respect, and every day there's a different story of strong, courageous women who never gave up. I'd lost my son, my daughter-in-law, and my faith in family bonds. But I'd gained something unexpected, the knowledge that even in our darkest moments, even when the people we love most betray us, we can choose to transform our pain into protection for others. The mail truck was pulling away as I went to lock up for the night. In my mailbox was a single envelope, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. No return address, just my name and a postmark from somewhere in Oregon. Inside was a photograph of an elderly man I'd never seen before, standing in a garden and smiling at the camera. On the back, someone had written, "This is my grandfather. He died last month during a vacation arranged by his lawyer. I think you might want to hear his story." I carried the photograph inside and placed it on my desk next to the case files Amanda and I were reviewing. Tomorrow, we'd add another name to our investigation list. Another family would get answers. Another killer would face justice. The work would never be finished. There would always be predators targeting vulnerable elderly Americans. Always be families torn apart by greed and betrayal. Always be victims who needed advocates willing to fight for the truth. But tonight, in my secure house with my changed locks and my newfound purpose, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Gratitude, not for what I'd survived, but for what I'd become. A woman who'd looked evil in the face and refused to be destroyed by it. A mother who'd lost her child but found her strength. A teacher who'd learned the most important lesson of all, that love without boundaries enables evil, but love with fierce protection can change the world. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I passed the mirror in my hallway. The woman looking back at me was 60 years old, gray-haired, and marked by experiences that had nearly killed her. She was also unafraid, and she was ready for whatever came next.